Hi, everyone. My name is Julia, and this is my colleague.
I'm Hermine, and we are writing services coordinators at the Student Learning Commons.
And we're here today to give a workshop called Strategies for University Writing. It's a part of the larger workshop series, Getting Ready for Academic Success. And we will begin the session, as we do for all of our workshops, with a land acknowledgement. So Hermine and I right now are both in the same office, and we are located on the unceded, traditional, and shared territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam nations. And you'll see that the slide also acknowledges the Kutsi Nation. So recognizing that SFU as a larger university also occupies other unceded lands, broadly known as Coast Salish territories. So when we are in the places that are currently known as SFU, we like to also recognize the relationship of many nations sharing this land for time immemorial, and recognize that we are continuing that work when we come together to learn to live well in a good way in this place together by attending university.
Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to cover the differences between high school and university writing. We're going to talk about what to do when you have to prepare for an assignment, when and where to seek help. We're going to give you some general writing tips for academic writing, and then we'll make a plan to check in again in a month. Okay, so differences between high school and university writing. So for some of us, high school was just last June, but for some of us, maybe high school was 20 years ago. And regardless, I'd like you to take a moment and think back to some essay writing tips that you've received in high school. So maybe you've been told to write 5-paragraph essays. And in those essays, you must have an introduction paragraph, you must have 3 main points and a conclusion. And you have to write a thesis statement at the end of the first paragraph. And in that thesis statement, it should be supported by 3 main points. And you have to include topic sentences at the beginning of every single paragraph. And at the end, you need to have a summarizing sentence and transition to the next paragraph. And of course, at the end of the essay, you need to summarize everything that you've just done. Okay, these are really good suggestions for high school essays, but you're going to realize that in university, things are a little bit different. So here's a comparison of what we expect in high school writing and what we're now looking at for in university writing. So instead of having that 5-paragraph essay, there are no predetermined number of paragraphs in your essays now. You can write as many paragraphs as you need as you explore more complex ideas and you get more complicated and more in-depth study of a certain topic. And your thesis statements now don't really have to be supported by only 3 main points, but you must now have a very strong position of where you stand on the topic that you're writing about. And you will also have to provide the reasons for believing in those in that position. Topic sentences are still needed, transitions are still needed, but we kind of move away from the more rigid structure of having to summarize every one of your paragraphs at the end of your paragraph. And when you write your conclusion, we now look for more than just summarizing everything that you've said, but we want to have a purpose with our writing. We want something that will change the reader's perspective. We want to call them to action. We want to leave them with something that they can take away from your essay. Now, back in high school, some of you may love printing on fancy paper, printing your essay, including a million pictures, and put some stickers on your essay. And usually, if the prettier it looks, maybe the higher grade you'll get. However, for university, we tend to like standard formatting because your essay is a standard official document that you submit to your professor. You will need to follow the conventions of your discipline, and more focus will be on the quality of your writing and the quality of your ideas rather than the visual. So you may include some pictures, but they're usually not needed, and they don't really give you any bonus marks. In your high school essay, you may want to write something based on your personal experience or based on your own opinions or something that happened to your Uncle Jack or whatever. But in university, we have to always use academic sources. So by that, we mean we want to use scholarly sources that come from studies and research, that come from people who are very well versed in a specific field rather than relying on your personal experience. And because we're often talking about more complex, complicated issues, we want to always acknowledge the different ideas on both sides of an argument, or maybe like 3 or 4 different sides. We want to show people that we've considered every single avenue, we've considered every single possibility, but we arrived at the conclusion that this is what we believe because of these reasons. All right, and finally, in high school, usually for every single subject like history and English and geography or whatnot, you will follow that 5-paragraph essay model, usually for most of your classes. But in university, we have different formats for different disciplines. So if you're in business, for example, you may not even write an essay. But if you're in other humanities subjects, they might follow a different convention. So that's something that you have to be aware of. And it's no longer enough to just demonstrate that you know something well, but your purpose of writing is now to engage in an analysis, and critical thinking is required where you add to that subject and add to what you've learned. Okay, so what is academic writing? What is university writing anyway? So it is a kind of writing with a purpose, just like all other types of writing, but more specifically, you will have to have a strong position. So whatever topic you're talking about, you will have to show that what you believe and why you believe in it. And you will also need to have claims and evidence to support your argument. And usually the writing will follow a structure, a standard structure, and it will have to be really organized. So again, you will have to use scholarly sources, and a certain amount of professionalism is expected in your writing. So it's not like writing a letter to your best friend or whatever. You will have to use more formal language, and you will have to use more academic language to talk about the subject matter. But one size does not fit all. Not every subject is going to be the same. Every single discipline will use their own language. They will use their own vocabulary. We'll talk about different contents, but also use different styles of writing, different formats and organization. So please pay attention to that when you are in your classes, and make sure that you're giving what your professor is asking for. So I'm going to actually hand it over to Julia to talk about how to prepare for an assignment.
Great, thanks, Hermine. So on the next slide, I just have some prompt questions for you to do a little bit of thinking about. How have you learned how to prepare for an assignment already? So those questions, if you want to go to the next slide, are when you were given an assignment in high school, or even if you are coming from college or another kind of experience, when did you start working on that assignment? And then how did you go about doing your research, and who did you go to for help? So I just want you to think about some strategies that you maybe are already familiar with, and also, did they work for you or not? Do you feel that the way you were going about allocating time for your assignments, the way that you were going about doing your research, and the way that you were seeking support for that, did it feel effective? Did it feel like it was working for you? Or are any of those areas that you might want to work on a bit? So if they are things that you want to work on, the rest of the presentation is going to give you some tips for how you might rethink some of those strategies as you transition into doing writing at a university level. So if you want to go to the next slide, thank you. So Hermine already gave a really great breakdown of some of the main differences between high school writing and university writing. And when we look at that on the level of the assignment, we can see some of those differences as well. So again, Hermine mentioned that university scholarly writing as a student is a particular kind of professional writing. It is formal. There's often very specific genre-based expectations. So depending on your discipline, they're going to tell you, this is how we lay out a paper in this discipline, or maybe they're not going to tell you, but maybe you're going to start to notice those things from the kinds of things that you're reading, and the kinds of sections that, or what's in your rubric, what are you being marked on? So it may not be that that your prof actually says to you, you have to have all of these parts in your assignment. You may have to do some figuring of that out yourself as well. And again, as Hermine mentioned, often university writing is very heavily research-based, especially if you're writing a research essay, a research assignment, because all of the claims that we make in university writing will need to be backed up with evidence. And generally speaking, that evidence is going to be what we find through our research and not just through our lived experiences or from one singular text. Sometimes we do still do that kind of writing where you have read one text, like a novel, and you are analyzing that text. And so most of your evidence is going to come directly from that one source. But often we're also bringing in other research to shore up the kinds of things that we want to say. And so because of that, we need to read lots before we write, and sometimes even while we're writing, and sometimes even after we think we've finished writing, we're going to still be reading and refining our ideas. Because we need to be analyzing that research. And so as it's not just that we need to find sources, but we actually need to interpret them and to come up with our own arguments based on what we find in the research. And so that analytical process can be what requires us to do even more research, because we read something and we start to interpret it, and then we realize, oh, I have more questions. I need to find out more. And so we do more research, and then we have more questions. And so this is what we call the iterative research process, where it's just kind of always continuing. And the reason that you're being asked in your university assignments to do all of that analysis and all of that research is that you're actually stepping into a position where you are contributing to the scholarly conversation that's happening. So the research is the part where you're listening to what is already being said, and your writing is your opportunity to say, here's what I want to add to this conversation. So that is the expectation of this kind of writing, is that you are bringing something into it. Sometimes that can feel really overwhelming to think, oh my gosh, I have to bring in something new. And it's true that you are often being asked to bring in something new, but I want to sort of take some of the pressure off. It doesn't have to be like, no one could ever have thought of this before at all in any kind of way. What is new about it is that it's your analysis, it's your interpretation. So you're not just saying, I read this and it said X, and I read this book and it said Y. You're not just listing or just quoting from things that you found. You're actually saying, when I read this, here is what I understand. Here is what I can say about it. And so that's the new that you're bringing in. And all of that analytical work requires time. You need thinking time to be able to do that, because you need the time to actually find the sources and then read the sources and then analyze the sources and do the writing. So you can't really effectively do that if all you have is 3 hours before it's due. You're not going to be able to, you may be able to whip something together, but it's never going to be as nuanced or as rich as it would have been had you given yourself actual thinking, processing time. The other reason that we often need more time is because the assignments can be less prescriptive. So they're often sort of a really broad, open prompt, but then you need to do some more work to narrow that down to something manageable that you can actually research and write something interesting about. So even before you get into doing your research and your writing, there can be some early on steps of narrowing down to something more manageable that you're going to write about. So if you can move ahead to the next slide, Hermine, thank you. So I've just been saying you need more time, but How much more time? Well, it's going to depend a little bit on the assignment and on you, right? Some people do read and write faster than others. But even if you think you're a really fast reader and writer, I want to encourage you to recognize that the more time you build in for yourself, the less overwhelming and stressful your work is going to be. So if you can break it down into steps, and on the slide here, we have a hyperlink, which obviously you can't click on, to the assignment calculator. So if you just search SFU Library Assignment Calculator, you're going to find that resource. And it is really helpful because what it does for you is you put in your due date and you put in the date you're going to start on your assignment, and it breaks it down into some steps for you. So in doing that, it can help you to start your assignment really early on, breaking it down into a few, every day you take a couple steps, or at least one step to move it forward, instead of trying to do the entirety of the assignment right towards the end. So using the assignment calculator early is also going to make sure that you do the second point on this slide, which is pay attention to the due date, because you're going to be putting it into the assignment calculator. So you're going to note what the due date is. It's really important, because if we've learned anything from the last several years, time can be a bit of a time warp. We can just sort of think it's only been a few minutes and it's actually been a week. So we need to really recognize that time doesn't always operate in the same ways, and be really aware of our due dates. And then also pay attention to how much an assignment is worth, right? Because if an assignment's only worth 5% of your grade, you don't want to spend tons and tons and tons of time working on it and then leave yourself no time for the assignment that's worth 20% of your grade. So you do need to be a bit strategic around how you're allocating your time and your energy for what is being required of you of your classes. And then how much reading are you expected to do? Again, it depends a bit on the assignment. Sometimes the assignment will actually tell you, read these 5 sources and find 2 more. Something like that. So sometimes it'll be very clear. Other times it's really just open. And so a good sort of parameter to think about is that if you're being told that you need to cite something like 7 to 10 academic sources, you should be planning to consult something in the neighborhood of 20. So around roughly double. Now, that doesn't mean you need to really read in depth 20 sources. That's probably not going to be possible, but you need to be prepared to get a larger number, sift through them, skim read them, and get a handle on which are sort of the 7 to 10 best, most effective ones for you to then dig into in more depth. So here's just a couple of really nitty gritty tips to help you focus yourself when you first get an assignment. First of all, read the instructions. I know it sounds really basic, but it can be easy to sort of skim over them, especially if you're busy, and be like, oh, I'll look at those later. And then be like, oh no, now this is due right away. And just never really give them very much time or attention. And when that happens, you're gonna miss things, aspects of the requirements for the assignment that your instructor put in there for you. So do read them, reread them, highlight and underline keywords, including things like the due date, and including things like the nouns and the verbs that are being used. So nouns are descriptive words, verbs. Yeah, nouns are the things that tell you what kind of thing your assignment needs to be. And verbs are telling you what kind of action you need to take. So you want to get a handle on, is this, for example, a research essay, or is it an expository essay, or is it a lab report? These are different genres of academic writing, and you want to be able to know at the outset what the qualities or the criteria for that kind of writing are, so that you can make sure that you accomplish that in your writing. And when you're not sure, ask the question. So you can ask your professor, you can ask your TA, you can ask us, and Hermine's going to talk a little bit more about each of those places you can go on the next slides.
All right, thank you, Julia. So so Julia mentioned that there are 3 different places that you could go look for help. So yes, talking to your professor and your TA is really important, because they're the best people who would understand the assignment instructions and the requirements, and they're also experts in the content. So go talk to them. They're usually really nice people and they welcome questions. So don't be scared. They're here to help you. So, and your professors and your TA may be really, really busy though. Like they can't really sit down with you for an hour to go over your paper. So here's where we come in at the Student Learning Commons. So you have the option of booking an appointment with a writing and learning peer. You have the option of attending one of these workshops, just like this one, where you find more tips, or you can also submit drafts to right away. So I'll just quickly go over all of these. So consultations, if you want to book a one-on-one appointment, you can do it either in person or virtual. And you can just go to this link here, sfu.mywconline.com. And we advise you to book your appointment as early as you can, because if you're busy and you have tons of assignments due, then all the other students in your class and in other classes are experiencing the same thing as well. So just make sure you plan ahead as part of your assignment calculator. One thing to note is that our peers don't really look at your content, but we will comment on your writing and your structure. And you can actually select peers who are in a similar program as you. So all of our peers are trained, but sometimes if you're, let's say, a philosophy major, it might be easier for you to consult somebody who is already taking your classes. But you can also get a different perspective from people who are not in your class as well. And don't feel pressure that you have to have a perfect draft before you come see us. We help you at every stage in your writing process. So if you have a rough draft, that's fine. Bullet points, sticky notes, whatever, just bring them in if you need somebody to help you through. Okay, so workshops like these, we have a wide variety of topics on writing and learning strategies. So if you need more tips on thesis statement, revising, ethical source integrations, you can check out our live in-person workshops or on Zoom, where you get to ask questions in real time, or you can watch one of these recorded workshops where you can watch at your own pace, and some of them are transcribed with closed captioning, so you can check out this link. And right away is an asynchronous service. So you can submit, if you finish your work at 2 a.m. at night, you can just email, submit it to rightaway.ca and get feedback by email. So usually it takes about 48 hours for people to get back to you, and you can resubmit the same assignment with the revisions up to 3 times. The good thing about this is not just a service from SFU, but it is it involves many different universities and colleges in BC. So SFU is just one of those institutions. So you get to hear from tutors from other institutions, and you get to hear their perspective. All right, so I'm going to pass it back to Julia to talk about general writing tips.
Great, thank you, Hermine. So, as we mentioned already a few times, there is no one size fits all, but there are some useful things that you can keep in mind when you're writing, regardless of the course or the assignment or the discipline. So one of them is to always think about, who is your audience? Who's actually going to be reading this? And in many cases for your assignments, the literal answer to that is that it's your professor who's going to be reading it. But sometimes it's not the most useful to think about writing to your professor, because what can happen when you do that is that you can kind of take things for granted. You assume, oh, my professor already knows this, so I don't have to say it. But because it's an assignment, your professor is looking for you to show them what you know, not assume what they know. So a useful kind of guideline to think about is that to sort of imagine that you're writing to other students who aren't in your class, other students at the same level as you. So you can think about, what are some of the qualities of these students? Well, they're well educated. They're also, pursuing post-secondary education, highly intelligent, highly curious, motivated, interested readers. They could potentially challenge your perspective on something. So you need to anticipate and think about how they might raise challenges and try to respond to them. And then because these students aren't already in your class, they're going to require some context. They're going to need some things explained to them. So they don't need it explained to them because they're not intelligent or they're not well educated. We already established that they are intelligent and educated. They just haven't studied this class. So if you're talking about a concept that's really familiar in the course, but not familiar outside of the course, it should probably be explained. If you're using a quotation, you should be introducing who said it and maybe something about their significance in the field as well. And so those aspects of needing to be able to provide context for someone who is well-educated, highly motivated, curious, but not in your discipline means that you need to do your research really well, because you need to be able to explain that context and potentially respond to challenges. So next slide. So some other writing tips. Your analysis does really matter. We talked about this previously, but we sometimes use what we call the 80-20 rule to describe this. So meaning that only about 20% of your content in your essay should be quoted or derived directly from other sources. You should have about 80% of your content coming from you, what you're bringing in, what you understand. And so I think about that as being that your sources and your research, they're an important foundation, right? This is what you are building on and what you're responding to. So it's really, really crucial 20%, but the rest of the building is coming from you. All the other floors after the foundation. So you really do need to be bringing some analysis and interpretation into what you're writing, and that's often the part that requires a lot of time. So this is your contribution to the conversation. As we talked about, you're not just summarizing or listing things that you read. Being able to do this analysis effectively often starts with having a clear thesis statement. And if it doesn't start there, it at least ends there. So you may find that your thesis statement is a little bit muddy as you're doing your research, but you do want to make sure that once you're ready to hand the paper in, that you have a clear statement where you're able to say, this is the claim that I am making in this paper, and these are the reasons why I make that claim. And we have lots of workshops and resources specifically around writing effective thesis statements. So we're not going to go into all of that here, but please know that if that feels like something that you want to learn more about, that's 100% a part of the support that we can offer to you. And then when you have that thesis statement, it's really crucial because you want to make sure that all the arguments that you're raising through the rest of your paper are connected to that thesis and really building on and supporting that thesis so that your entire paper is making one clear and cohesive argument. So some last general tips are that outlines can really help you to organize your information. Some people love outlines. They make super detailed and then many different outlines until they have a full draft. That can be a way of writing. Other people don't love them as much. I personally am not a huge outliner, but when I learned about reverse outlines, that really works for me as a process. So a reverse outline is when you give yourself the sort of permission to write a really messy first draft. But then once you have that draft, you break it back down into an outline so that you can start to look at structure and organization, because really what an outline is about is helping you get structure and organization to your thoughts. So lots of different ways to do that. And again, this is something that we can provide more information and support around as you're actually getting into doing your assignments. Taking notes is a super important part of writing. It's not the essay itself, but it is a form of your writing that you need to practice doing. So taking notes in your course, absolutely. And also taking notes when you're researching. Making sure that when you're researching, part of your notes includes where is this coming from really clearly, so that you don't end up in the situation of trying to write your paper and going, oh, I have the best quote for this, but I have no idea who said it or where to cite it from. That is a very frustrating experience. So hopefully you will avoid it. Related to that is that you always want to make sure that you're citing your sources to help you avoid unintentional plagiarism. So again, we have lots of support resources related to this, but taking clear notes of where your information is coming from as you research, which is sometimes called cite as you write, is going to be a really helpful aspect of setting yourself up for success in that way. Making sure that you're not just reading your assignment guidelines at the very beginning of when you work on your assignment, but actually going back to them towards the end so that you can look at, have I met all the requirements, including the nitty gritty formatting. If my prof says it should be in Times New Roman 12-point font, I don't want to hand it in Calibri. I want to make sure it's in Times New Roman. So double checking those things at the end, and making sure that you leave yourself time, build in on purpose time to revise, edit, and proofread your writing. So those are some general tips, and I'll hand it back over to Hermine to wrap us up.
Thank you, Julia. So how are you guys feeling? So if you're feeling like, oh my God, so overwhelmed, don't worry. This is how we all felt when we were in first year, and probably every single year after too. So now that you know, plan ahead, find out when is your first assignment, find out what you need to do, what questions you have. And now that you know, when do you want to go seek help, and who do you want to go talk to if you have these questions? We really want to help you and be part of your learning journey. So we want to see you at the Student Learning Commons when you have your first assignment. And again, this is our website, so feel free to check out our website here. Again, we do have in-person or virtual writing workshops and recorded webinars. They're completely free for you, and so you can just join us. And we also have a wide range of online writing resources. So if you want, let's say, a short worksheet or a short handout about thesis statement writing, you can just take a look at those resources. We also have the one-on-one in-person or virtual consultation with our trained peer educators. And not only can they help you with writing, but they can also help you with reading skills, studying skills, and different strategies. So if you're like, oh, I'm trying to read this research paper, but I'm not retaining the information, or I'm having a really hard time understanding anything that's on it, feel free to book an appointment and we can help you out with breaking down your studying and giving you like different tips so that it makes it easier for you. All right, so that's it for our presentation. Thank you very much for joining us. And we do hope to see you in about a month when you have your first assignment. So come see us, come talk to us. We're really friendly people. And but bye for now.
Bye, thanks.